Hi, I'm Alex from the Zscaler Customer Success Engineering team. In this series of short videos, we're taking a look at the baseline recommendations for the configuration of cloud firewall policies inside ZIA. This is part 3, Deployment Considerations. Before you start defining firewall filtering policies and enabling those policies, if your Zscaler tenant is brand new, this is generally what you will see in the firewall filtering policy section of the Zscaler admin interface. These default firewall rules include a rule to allow web traffic to use Zscaler internet access. Rules number 2 and 3 are one-click rules which are enabled via Policy, URL and Cloud App Control Advanced Settings. In both cases, these allow traffic towards either Office 365 in the case of the Office 365 one-click rule, or various UCAS services for the UCAS one-click rule. Finally, at the bottom we have a default filtering rule. For newer tenants, this will be block drop, but you may find if your tenant is older that this policy is set to allow. Note that at this stage, even if these policies are configured, they are not being applied to any traffic until firewall has been enabled on locations. Let's take a look at what it takes to deploy firewall without causing a disruption. Let's start with the standard firewall. First, you'll want to make sure that your default action is set to allow all traffic. You should review your existing legacy firewall for any explicit block policies. You should then configure allow and block policies in ZIA to match as necessary. Note that standard firewall has several limitations. First, you can only build network service policies. Secondly, you're only allowed a maximum of 10 firewall filtering rules. Thirdly, user, group, or department attributes cannot be used as match criteria. Note that non-standard ports can be labeled as network services or attributed to specific well-known protocols. Once you've created your policies, enable firewall at the location or sublocation level. Finally, make sure that you're forwarding all traffic to Zscaler. For example, this may involve converting tunnels and policy-based routing from 8443 to all ports and protocols, and you'll want to make sure that you implement zTunnel 2.0 for remote users with client connectors. As with all other policies inside Zscaler, after deployment, you'll want to make sure that you monitor and improve your policies. You can do this by forwarding firewall NSS feeds to your SIEM to identify block reasons during troubleshooting. For example, was this block caused by a default rule? You'll want to continue building allow policies to match your needs, allowing traffic from specific locations to sublocations to necessary destinations or services. You'll also want to create block rules as necessary to work with your policy. As with all other policy rule lists inside Zscaler, firewall policies are evaluated from the top down, and rules will not be evaluated after the first match. This means that if your block rules are placed after your allow rules, traffic will never be blocked. Finally, once the default policy, which was set to allow during deployment, no longer sees any rule hits because traffic is being caught by granular allow policies or specific block rules that you've created beforehand, you want to switch the default policy to a default block rule. Configuring policy in this way means that you can start building your allow and block rules while allowing traffic by default, and then switch to blocking it by default, which is much more secure. For advanced firewall, again, you'll want to make sure that the default rule is set to allow, and review existing legacy firewall policies for any explicit block policies. You'll then configure allow and block policies in ZIA to match as necessary. In this case, for advanced firewall, you can build network services and network application policy. You can use user and group information for granular rules, and non-standard ports are discovered by the DPI engine, so there's no need for manual configuration. Once these rules are configured, you'll enable Cloud Firewall at the location or sublocation level, and then make sure that all traffic is being tunneled to Zscaler. Again, once this initial configuration is done, you'll enter a continuous monitoring and improvement mode. A quick note, Zscaler recommends blocking the QUIC protocol. By default, if traffic uses the QUIC protocol, the TLS handshake is not always performed, which means the content can remain invisible even with SSL inspection. By blocking QUIC, you can force traffic to fall back to TLS transport, allowing for SSL inspection of traffic, which will allow security and data protection policies to be applied to that traffic. Doing this is very simple, as it only involves creating a rule that blocks the QUIC network service with a block ICMP action for all users, and placing that rule at the top of the policy list. To round this section out, here are quick tips for how to enable firewall. First, as mentioned, Firewall Control is enabled at the location or sublocation configuration level. There are two toggles here. Enforce Firewall Control will enable applying firewall policies to this location or sublocation, and Enable IPS Control will do the same thing for IPS controls. For Road Warriors, ensure that the Enable Firewall for zTunnel 1.0 and PAC Road Warriors setting is enabled inside Administration Advanced Setting. Note that for traffic that uses PAC files in ZTNL 1.0, this will still only forward web traffic, since those traffic forwarding methods are not all ports and protocol capable. When creating firewall rules, you simply want to select the road warrior location inside the locations criteria in order to make sure that the traffic applies to remote users. Finally, inside administration's locations, you can check the firewall status for all locations by looking at the firewall filtering column. If this is set to enable, then firewall filtering is enabled for that location or sublocation. If it displays 3 dashes, then firewall filtering is not enabled for that location. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching.